So I'm Arnav Sen, and welcome to our. Do I need to start again? No. So welcome to the to our annual conference. Some of you may have had some difficulties due to our new cashless state. I hope they're all sorted out, but I'm sure you guys will have a lot of fun over the next few days. Just wanted to mention one thing. You know, this is the 12th conference. A few of you may remember that there was an earlier incarnation of this conference, and I think it had the title Conference on Economic Theory and Related Mathematical Methods. And that died, that petered out and died, just like economic theory, I suppose, for his time. But I mean, it was revived with a new title, and I mean, I think it would be fair to say it's been a great success. And it's a success, I would say, almost entirely due to the efforts of Trideep. I mean, the kind of effort that he puts in, you know, the attention to detail, and the sort of overall effort level is, you know, is almost superhuman. So I think even before the conference starts, we should applaud him again for his efforts. And so nothing else. Welcome again, and Chetan and Gita. Okay, thank you.
Hi, good morning. I want to second the very warm welcome to all of you. And so we'll start. I'm delighted to introduce our plenary speaker for the morning, Gita Gopinath, who's the John Swanstra Professor of International Studies and of Economics at Harvard, and a leading authority in the field of international finance and macro. As you all know, she studied at LSR, Delhi School, and received her PhD from Princeton. And before Harvard, she was at Chicago for a few years. She's one of the managing editors of the Review of Economic Studies and is also co-editor of the Handbook of International Economics. She's made several important contributions to the field of international economics in topics ranging from the literature on emerging market business cycles, the sovereign debt literature, fiscal devaluations, and the international price system. And she straddles both the academic world and policy world with equal zest. The World Economic Forum appointed her as a young global leader in 2011, and she was a participant at the Jackson Hole meetings last year, and I think the year before, and she was recently appointed as economic advisor to the Chief Minister of Kerala, so she's all over the place. And today she will speak on ongoing research on the international price system and talk about the dominant currency paradigm in small open economies. Gita, we're delighted to have you here, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
This is, no, that's not the clicker. Which is the clicker? So, thank you so much for inviting me here, Trideep and Chetan. This is a great opportunity. I've never been to ISI before. This is my first time here, so it's a real pleasure. So the title here, The Dominant Currency Paradigm, kind of comes from probably a decade of thinking about the issues of prices and exchange rates, and I've worked on this with many co-authors. This particular paper is with the co-authors whose names are on the slide over there. So let me just start by giving you a sense of the motivation for why this is, I believe, are an important set of issues. So we all know that exchange rates, nominal exchange rates, you know, the stuff that you see in the newspaper every day, are extremely volatile. So the rupee relative to the dollar moves around all over the place. On this graph over here, you have the exchange rate of the dollar relative to its trading partners. So it's the dollar trade-weighted nominal exchange rate, which is the blue dashed line. And you have the euros per dollar, which is the green line. And you don't really need to pay that much attention to the details of this picture, except the fact that this stuff moves around. and has fairly large movements over time. So the question you can ask yourself is, why do we care about this? Why do we care about, the fact that the exchange rate moves around? This is a nominal variable. It's the value of one currency relative to others. Why do we care about it? And we've been trained as international economists to care a lot about this. And the reason we do is because we believe that there are nominal rigidities in the world in terms of prices that get set. Right? So if you were trained in believing that all prices were fully flexible, then you kind of have the result of the neutrality of most nominal variables, or of money and any other kind of nominal variable, doesn't matter. And prices do the adjustment, and so I should really not care about the nominal exchange rate. But we do care about the nominal exchange rate because of the fact that we have a lot of evidence over many decades that basically points to the fact that prices are very rigid. And doesn't require very deep research to figure that out. If you go to a store, the price at which you can buy a product in a store is not moving around with the exchange rate. And so, it is what it is. So because of that, we believe that fluctuations in nominal exchange rates affect relative prices. And we know that once you're moving around relative prices, those will have real effects on the economy. It has implications for real output, for consumption, for the trade balance of a country. All of those things matter. So before I go into the details of the model that's the main meat of the paper, I want to give you a little bit of a background of where our understanding is of the relation between nominal exchange rates and real variables. And how I believe the dominant currency paradigm kind of changes that particular set of ideas that we have. So the first is, so that's why I start off by calling the first generation kind of consensus view. This goes back to Fleming and Mundell. And then there were more modern treatments of it in the work by Obstfeld and Rogoff. And then many other researchers following that. So this, in my view, is this consensus view, and I'll explain what exactly that is. But that view is what I would say is what pretty much most policymakers in the world hold as their description of what nominal exchange rate fluctuations imply for their country. So first assumption is that prices are rigid in the producer's currency. Now, what does that mean? It means basically, okay, now I said something that prices are rigid, but when I start talking about international trade, I have to be more specific. I have to tell you, okay, it's rigid in what? So if I'm an Indian firm selling to the US market, is the price rigid in rupees? Is the price rigid in dollars? Is the price rigid in euros or any other currency? I can't just say prices are rigid. You have to tell me which currency it's rigid in. So the producer currency pricing assumption basically says that prices are rigid in the currency of the producing country. So in my example of an Indian firm selling to the US market, the price is rigid in the currency in rupees, because that's the currency of the producing country. When a US firm sells to the Indian market, prices are going to be rigid in dollars. Okay, it's not rigid permanently, but it's rigid with a duration of about a year. Prices are rigid in dollars, and that would produce a currency pricing. So that's the kind of basic underlying assumption of Mundell-Fleming, which is that prices are sticky in the producer's currency. So when you make that assumption, then you immediately get a bunch of kind of simple back-of-the-envelope ideas of what would happen to, say, inflation. The depreciations of your currency would be inflationary. So what I've just put up there is, again, let's think of the country being India. P superscript M is the price of imports coming into India. And let's suppose that the country that it's coming from is the US. So P bar is basically the dollar price of my import from the US, and that dollar price is sticky. What that means is that when the exchange rate depreciates, then that's going to cause prices in rupees for those imported goods in the Indian market to go up 1-to-1, right? So there's a 10% depreciation of the rupee relative to the dollar. That's a 10% increase in the prices of imported goods coming into the Indian market from the US. The other important variable So we have the sense that depreciations are inflationary. And the flip side, which is that appreciations of your currency, which is strengthening of your currency, is going to be disinflationary. The other important variable that's kind of very central to Mundell-Fleming is the terms of trade. Okay, you can define it's a ratio of two prices. You can define it as whichever way you want to. I'm going to define it as the price of exports over the price of imports. Okay? So again, keeping the assumption of producer currency pricing. Again, let's again do the India and the US. The price of exports going out of India are assumed to be sticky in rupees. I divide that by the price of imports, which is just that equation up there. And as I said, that moves one-to-one with the exchange rate. So when the exchange rate depreciates, which means this E measure goes up, that's a deterioration of your terms of trade. Because it makes the price of your imported goods more expensive in rupee terms in the Indian market. It makes your exports cheaper in dollar terms in the foreign market. That's a deterioration of your terms of trade. Okay? And so this gives rise to the famous expenditure switching result, which is that when your currency depreciates, all else equal, now setting aside general equilibrium considerations, which I'll come back to when I actually do the model, but just do the very simple thing that something that drives the exchange rate around depreciation will improve your trade balance. Which means that because now your goods are relatively competitive on world markets, you will sell more. Because imported goods are more expensive at home, you will buy less. And so your imports would go down, your exports will go up, and that's an improvement in the trade balance. So this basic idea that when your exchange rate depreciates, that it can be inflationary, and it can be, but on the flip side, your terms of trade deteriorates, or rather, you become more competitive on international markets, and because of that, your exports go up, is the basic kind of principle that policymakers and most other people have in their head when they do this. And they have it for a very good reason. It comes from a very good set of research that we have and very leading ideas. And it doesn't matter who's the central banker that's saying it. It could be the Indian central bank, or it could be Janet Yellen in the US, or Urjit Patel in India. They would both say the similar thing. They would say the exact same. If my currency depreciates, it's inflationary, but it could be good for the export sector. Now, what researchers discovered was that there's something maybe not so perfect about this, because it doesn't look like the prices of goods in India change that much with the exchange rate. And it doesn't look like the prices of the goods coming into the US change that much with the exchange rate. So you had the other second generation set of models, which is the local currency pricing models, that was started out by Betts and Devereaux and Engel. And where the assumption was the other extreme, which is that the prices are not rigid in the producing country, but in the currency of the destination country. So prices of goods coming into India are sticky in rupees. Prices of goods going out of India are sticky in the destination currency. So if the destination country is the US, it's sticky in dollar terms. In that world, there is no effect on inflation. Why? Because if the prices of goods coming into India are sticky in rupees and they're not moving with the exchange rate, then there's no effect on inflation. Secondly, you have the absolute opposite prediction for depreciations in terms of trade. The terms of trade actually appreciates when your currency depreciates. You can see that again from that ratio over there. So the price, you want to write a relative price in a common currency. So the denominator is the price of your imports. The imported goods that you're getting are sticky in rupee terms, so that's just that. The numerator is the rupee equivalent of your sales outside. If the dollar price at which you're selling in the US market isn't changing, then when your currency depreciates, the rupee value of that goes up. So that's actually the opposite. It's a complete opposite thing, which is making your goods more relative. In terms of this ratio, you actually have an appreciation of the terms of trade. You have no expenditure switching in this environment. It's the other extreme. You have absolutely no expenditure switching at all. Why is that? Because the prices of goods that I'm buying at in India are sticky in rupees, so that's not going to change my demand for it. Prices at which the US consumers are buying my products is sticky in dollars, and so in the short run, I'm not going to change my demand for it. And so you don't have any expenditure switching. So the research is kind of, I'm just citing the Handbook of Monetary Economics, that basically goes into extensive details about how these two paradigms work when you're producer currency pricing and local currency pricing. My summary of the literature is that when, I would say about 75%, 80% of it is in the Mundell-Fleming paradigm. The rest of it is in this particular paradigm. So what's the dominant currency paradigm? The dominant currency paradigm is basically saying that if you actually line up the facts in the world and you look at what firms set their prices in, it's not producer currency pricing, it's not local currency pricing, but it's actually invoicing in very few currencies. And the dollar is, in some sense, the dominant currency. Not for all regions and parts of the world, but overwhelmingly, the dollar has a very large role. For some countries, it could be the euro, but for a lot of countries, it happens to be the dollar. So it is not as if countries are trading in multiple currencies on international markets. There are very, very few currencies being used. Now, you could say, well, I really don't care about what the price is invoiced in, because if prices are fully flexible, again, it doesn't matter whether I call it a dollar price or a euro price or any other price. I can just quote you the price in whatever currency you want it in. But the fact is, we know from more recent research that prices are actually rigid in their currency of invoicing. So this dollar price at which you're selling everywhere in the world actually has rigidity to it. So the exchange rate is moving around in the background, but the dollar price at which you're selling is literally exactly the same for about a 10 to 12 month period. So you have that. The other fact about pricing in international markets is that it's not just about this Keynesian extreme of conditional prices being completely sticky, but you also have that conditional on a price change. Prices are not very sensitive to the exchange rate. Okay, what does that mean? It means that if you collect some data on international prices, you will see that there are prices that change infrequently, but then you will have periods when they are changing. And if you try to econometrically back out the sensitivity of that new price or the changed price to the exchange rate changes that preceded it, you would find that there's very low sensitivity to it. It's not zero, but it's very low. And there's lots of kind of micro evidence trying to understand why that is. And there are two aspects to it. One is strategic complementarity in pricing, which is basically pointing to the fact that when firms sell products in the market, they face competitors. But it's not just that they face competitors, but their optimal markup that they want to charge is going to depend upon their price relative to the market price. Right? So we're deviating from a constant markup world, because the idea is that I'm a firm, I'm an Indian firm, I'm selling in the US market, I'm competing with another Chinese firm that's selling in the US market, I'm competing with US producers. If, for instance, the rupee appreciates and I want to raise my dollar price at which I sell to the US market, I'm going to worry about losing market share to all these guys. And so that's going to reduce my incentive to raise prices even when I'm allowed to change it flexibly. So that's one. The second is imported intermediate inputs, which is the fact that now we obviously recognize very well that most exporters are also importers. And the value-added component of trade is much smaller than the value of trade, right? Because most firms that are exporting products also use imported intermediate inputs in their production. And so the value-added component is much smaller. So in that case, if your imported intermediate inputs are priced in a different currency, then again, your incentive to change your price when your currency moves around is going to be smaller. I'll come back to this in a little more detail later. By the way, I suppose I take questions during the talk, right? Right. There's a Q&A at the end. Okay, but if any of you feel like asking a question, please feel free to do so. But I go until till 11:30. Okay. All right. So so the dominant currency paradigm is the three pieces together, bringing the three pieces together, which is bringing in the fact that there is it's not producer currency pricing and local currency pricing, but pricing in very few currencies. And I'm going to do the extreme where there's pricing in one currency, which is the dollar. The fact that you have strategic complementarity in pricing when you are making your pricing decisions. And the fact that there's imported input, use, and production. So the three of them is going to comprise the dominant currency paradigm. And my plan is, after showing you how the model works and the details of it, is to tell you how is it that this differs from the predictions of kind of the more canonical Mundell-Fleming model and the kind of the LCP environment. Okay, any questions? All right. So before I just do the model, let me show you some evidence for my claim that most of international trade is invoiced in very few currencies. So that's that graph over there. So what I did, so this actually comes from my Jackson Hole paper, where what I did was pull together data for about half of world imports and exports. Which is basically get data at the country level on their invoicing shares, right? So I get the data on what fraction of the imports are invoiced in different currencies and what fraction of their exports are invoiced in different currencies and what those currencies are. So what I have here is the graph which is for imports. The first column over here basically breaks it down in the following sense. So the dark part, the absolutely black part there, is the share of world imports, that is US imports. So it's the ratio of US imports over world imports. Okay. The kind of whitish grayish line there, section there, is the same thing, but for Euro area countries that use the euro as their currency. So again, it's the share of imports going into the euro area divided by total world imports. And that's the grayish part there, the topmost part is everybody else, every other country. And so it all has to add up to 1, which it does. And we do the same thing, but we do it in terms of invoicing information, which is basically saying what fraction of world imports are invoiced in dollars, and that's the black part. What fraction of world imports are invoiced in euros, that's the second part there. And the top part is what is the fraction of world imports that is invoiced in any other currency. And you can see immediately that there's this big, there's a disproportionate amount of trade that gets invoiced, imports that get invoiced in dollars as opposed to what goes to the US. So that ratio is about 4.7. This ratio of this thing here to this thing here is 4.7. If you look at the euro, in the case of the euro, it's much more proportionate. There's some, there's a little more invoicing use of the euro, but it's about 1.2. So it's 1.2 times the share of their imports in world trade. So whenever the euro gets used, there's, some other country the euro is on one side of the transaction. In this case, on the import side. And every other currency in the world takes up a tiny, tiny fraction of the less than 10%. About less than 20% for sure of all of the trade in imports. The right hand does exactly the same thing, but it does it for exports. And again, you see that the dollar is about 3 odd times more in the use of the dollar in exports relative to the US's exports to the world. Euro is about the same, 1.2. So this is a fact which says that if we were defining Mundell-Fleming or producer currency pricing or local currency pricing, this would not be the picture that you'd have. You'd have a lot more proportional appearance between the share of your imports or your share of your exports relative to the currency used in those different currencies. Yeah.
You say these are averages post-1999. Are these percentages or multiples stable over the last 20 years?
Yes. So the reason we have 1999 is just because of how far it takes us back. For some countries, it goes back even further, like for Japan. But there's a lot of stability.
So there's no trend towards more or less dollarization over these last 20 years?
Not in any deeply meaningful way. The only place where there's a change, obviously, is I don't have the data for that, but we would expect to see it as the euro. When the euro gets introduced, then there's obviously a change in what happens at that time. And there are some papers that have pointed out some switches around that time, but there's not very good data on it. But for most other countries in the world, there is some movement, but in terms of economic significance, it's not that much to report about.
Wouldn't you expect that if you did this a long time ago, like 30 or 40 years ago, the dollar would be even more prevalent?
To the extent that the euro has come in and been used by more people in the world market, yes. But again, as a magnitude, I think we're not talking about very, very big movements. I mean, meaningfully big movements. Okay.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
So it seems, just on the previous graph, it seems like the euro gets used in the euro area, but the dollar gets used in the rest of the world. So just jumping ahead in the analysis, do you take the US and the rest of the world other than the euro area? Or you're saying the dollar is the dominant currency in the rest of the world? I mean, you should be taking the EU area out of it, right?
Yes, so from a modeling perspective, obviously I can describe it any way which way I want. So I'm going to have a small open economy, which you could think of as India, trading with the US and trading with everybody else, which is not the US. I'm not going to do US, Euro, and everybody else, if that's the question. I'm just going to simplify that. So here is the own currency used. So this is basically looking at how well your own currency gets used in your imports and exports. And you see that for the US, the dollar gets used in 93% of its imports and 97% of its exports. So it's obviously its own currency is used basically all the time. But what's interesting is the moment you move away from the US, you start going to other countries that their own currency shares drop very quickly. So Italy, Germany, Spain, France, if you look at their trade outside the euro area, so this is not including trade in the euro area, we're getting about 55, 60% of it is using the euro, but then the rest is using other currencies, and mostly those other currencies is basically the dollar. You get to the UK, only 32% of UK imports are invoiced in pounds, the remaining are in dollars and in euros. You go down to Norway, Sweden, you get down to Japan. 23% of Japanese imports are invoiced in yen. The rest are invoiced actually pretty much in dollar terms. So I like the case of Japan very much because Japan the yen is a reserve currency. It's the currency, there's a lot of flight, whenever there's flight to safety, people always go to besides the dollar, they go to the yen. So it's not as if these are currencies that don't have enough might. Or the UK pound or any of those currencies, they're all part of the SDR. So, these are prominent currencies. Despite that, when Japan trades with the world, it uses, even in transactions where the US is not even involved, it ends up using the dollar as its invoicing currency, which is pretty stunning because you would think that given that, the yen is such a well-accepted currency and the Japanese central bank is a very well-regarded central bank, that this would not be the case. And once you start going to emerging markets, obviously this completely starts disappearing. So India shows up there, up to the second decimal point, there's nothing. There's no rupee used in India's exports or in its imports. And pretty much all of it, over 80% of it is basically dollars. There's a much smaller fraction in euros, but it's mostly dollars. But that's kind of what it is. And given that emerging market share in world imports and exports have grown in the recent 10, 15 years, this, if you do trade weighted, the share of invoicing in dollars has become even more important recently compared to in the past. Okay, so I've showed you the fact that there's a lot of invoicing in dollars. I haven't shown you that these prices are sticky in dollars. You're going to have to take my word for it. I have a few papers on this, and there are some other authors who've written on this topic. And the typical durations tend to be between 10 to 12 months in the price stickiness. So Keynesian assumption that prices change infrequently is very much there. What this table is basically saying is that most of that stickiness is in one or two currencies in the world, and the dollar is a big one. Okay, So the model that we have in the paper is a New Keynesian small open economy model.